The Halloween party was in full swing by the time I stepped through the grand entrance of the manor. Pumpkins carved into mischievous grins lined the walkway, and fake cobwebs dangled from the old oak trees. I had barely bothered with a costume, throwing on a pirate hat at the last minute. To be honest, the last thing I wanted to do tonight was party. But I had to be here. The drinks were flowing, laughter echoed across the room, and everyone seemed to be having the time of their lives. Except me. I stood by the bar, swirling the dark amber liquid in my glass, and watching from a distance. My eyes kept drifting across the room, settling on Max and Lily, my wife and my best friend. They looked like they belonged together, I realized bitterly. Max, tall and charismatic as ever, was dressed in a sleek vampire costume, his arm casually draped over Lily's shoulder. Lily, in her witch's outfit, was laughing at something he had said, her eyes sparkling in a way they hadn't around me for months. It had been months, maybe even years, since I had truly felt like Lily and I were still a team. That night in June had changed everything. I stumbled upon the texts by accident, really. I wasn't snooping, but when her phone buzzed with that familiar message tone, and I saw Max's name, something inside me compelled me to check. Just a quick glance, I thought, trying to convince myself it was innocent. But what I found shattered me. Their affair wasn't a one-night mistake, not even a brief fling. It had been going on for months, behind my back. My best friend and my wife. I read and reread their texts, each one more painful than the last. They met when I was working late, sometimes under the guise of working out together or having a quick coffee break that stretched hours longer than I realized. The drinks at the party weren't doing enough to numb the rage that simmered beneath my skin. I watched them now across the room, still pretending like I was too blind to see what was right in front of me. Lily knew how to act innocent, but there were times, like tonight, where she forgot I existed, even in the same room. Suddenly, a soft voice broke through my haze. "Victor, what's wrong?" I blinked, pulled out of my thoughts, and found myself staring into the concerned eyes of Clara, Max's wife. She was dressed as a sleek black cat, her green eyes sharp and searching. For a moment, I was at a loss for words. Clara and I had always been friendly, but tonight, her concern felt different. Genuine. "Clara," I muttered, trying to force a smile. "It's nothing. Just not really in the party mood, I guess." But she wasn't buying it. She pulled up a chair and sat down beside me, her expression serious. "Victor, you look like you've seen a ghost. Tell me what's going on. I can help. Maybe you need to talk about it." My throat tightened. Could she really help? Could anyone? I glanced again at Max and Lily, now standing even closer, laughing like they shared some secret no one else could understand. I wanted to tell Clara everything, to finally unload the weight that had been crushing me for months. But I hesitated. What would that do to her? Instead, I just shook my head. "It's nothing. Just work stuff. Got a lot on my mind." Clara's lips curled into a soft smile, but her eyes held a sadness I didn't expect. "You don't fool me, you know," she whispered, leaning in a little closer. "I've known you for years. Something's wrong, and I don't think it's just work." She glanced in the direction of Max and Lily. For a moment, our eyes met in mutual understanding. And then I knew. She knew. But how much? I stood up quickly, almost knocking over my drink in the process. "I need some air," I mumbled. "Excuse me?" As I walked toward the back patio, the cool night air hit me like a wave of relief. But the weight of what I had just seen, what I had just felt, was still there, clinging to me like the very shadows of this Halloween night. Something had to change. Something had to give. I wasn't going to sit and watch them mock me any longer. I stood on the patio, leaning against the railing, letting the cool October air clear my head. From the distance, I could still hear the faint sounds of laughter and music filtering through the open doors. The party was continuing without me, but I couldn't bring myself to go back inside. Not yet. I looked up at the night sky, dark and endless. It felt as if my world was crumbling, yet everything around me remained untouched. It was unfair, the way life just carried on while mine was teetering on the edge of collapse. Max and Lily were still laughing, still living their double lives, while I was suffocating under the weight of their betrayal. I heard soft footsteps behind me. "Victor," Clara's voice again. I turned, trying to smile, but knowing it was useless. Clara stepped closer, her arms wrapped around herself to ward off the chill. Her expression was serious, more intense than I'd ever seen it. "I'm sorry if I pushed too hard earlier," she said quietly. "But I can't shake the feeling that there's something you're not telling me." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I watched her face, the way her eyes searched mine as if she could see right through me. There was something about Clara, a sharpness, a quiet strength, that had always intrigued me. But tonight, I wasn't in the mood to dance around the truth any longer. "I know, Clara," I said, my voice finally steady. "I know about them." Her eyes widened, but she didn't flinch. "Them?" she asked softly, though I could tell she already knew the answer. "Max and Lily," I said, feeling the weight of those words as they left my mouth. "I've known for months now about their affair. I just haven't said anything yet." For a moment, silence hung between us like a thick fog. Clara's face was pale, her lips pressed tightly together as if she were holding something back. Then, she exhaled sharply, almost like she had been holding her breath this entire time. "I suspected it," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to believe it, but I've had my doubts for a while now." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief that I wasn't alone in this. That Clara, of all people, was in the same sinking boat. "I wasn't sure how to tell you," I said quietly. "I didn't want to make things worse." Clara shook her head, a bitter smile tugging at her lips. "Worse? Victor, I've been living in the dark for so long, pretending everything was fine. This is worse than knowing the truth." We stood there, side by side, both staring out into the dark expanse of the yard, each of us lost in our own painful thoughts. It felt like an eternity passed before Clara spoke again. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I hadn't fully decided yet, but I knew I couldn't keep living like this. "I've been planning," I said, surprising even myself with the calmness in my voice. "Gathering evidence, preparing for the right moment. Max and Lily think they've gotten away with everything, but I'm not going to let them." Clara's gaze shifted to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and something else. Determination, perhaps. "Victor, whatever you're planning, count me in." I looked at her, taken aback. "Clara, I don't want you to get hurt more than you already have." She shook her head firmly. "I've been hurt for long enough. It's time I take control of my life again. And if you're going after Max, I want to help." There was something fierce in her eyes, a spark of the woman I'd known before all of this. The same Clara who was always the first to call out someone's lies, who never let anyone walk all over her. I saw her now, standing before me, and I realized we were both ready for the same thing: justice. For a moment, we stood in silence, the weight of our decisions hanging in the air. I felt my chest tighten, but it wasn't from fear. It was anticipation. This was it, the beginning of the end for them. "They won't see it coming," I said softly, a small smile forming on my lips. "We'll make sure of that." Clara nodded, her hand resting on the railing next to mine. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't alone, and that made all the difference. The next few days passed in a blur. Halloween was over, but the mask I wore remained in place. Every morning, I woke up next to Lily, pretending that everything was fine, pretending that I didn't know about the lies, the secrets. She still smiled at me like nothing had changed, and part of me wondered how long she thought she could keep it up. But I played along. I had to. "Not yet," I told myself. Not yet. Clara and I met several times after the party, always in secret, away from prying eyes. We talked strategy, went over the details. She was sharp, sharper than I had given her credit for. While I had been gathering evidence against Lily, Clara had been doing the same with Max. She had financial records, emails, even photos. Together, we were building a case that would bring them down not just personally, but professionally as well. We had to be careful. Max was well connected in our town, and he had friends in high places. If we made a wrong move, he could crush us both before we even had a chance to expose the truth. But Clara was just as motivated as I was. She had lived under his thumb for too long, and now, she was ready to reclaim her life. It was late one evening when I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of documents Clara had given me. The house was quiet. Lily was out, probably with Max again. I no longer cared where she went at night, as long as it gave me time to think. The evidence we had was damning. Bank statements showing Max siphoning money from his company, love letters between him and Lily, and most damaging of all, the emails where they discussed how they would handle things if Clara or I ever found out. I pored over the papers, my anger growing with each line I read. They were so confident, so sure of themselves. They had talked about us like we were obstacles, nothing more than problems to be managed. It was all business to them, how to protect themselves, how to keep their affair going without raising suspicion. But they had underestimated us. Suddenly, I heard the front door creak open. I quickly shoved the papers back into their folder and slid it under a stack of magazines, just as Lily walked into the kitchen. She was wearing that same smile, the one that used to make my heart race, but now only filled me with disgust. "Hey," she said, her voice light, as if she hadn't just spent the evening with another man. "How was your day?" I forced a smile. "Busy. You?" She shrugged, moving toward the fridge to grab a drink. "Oh, just catching up with some friends. It's been a long week." "Yeah," I muttered, watching her closely. "It sure has." She didn't seem to notice the edge in my voice, or if she did, she was too preoccupied to care. She poured herself a glass of wine and leaned against the counter, sipping it as if everything was perfectly normal. I stood up, walking around the kitchen island until I was directly in front of her. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept my expression calm, neutral. "Lily," I said softly, meeting her eyes. She blinked, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "Yes." I leaned in a little closer, lowering my voice. "Do you think I'm stupid?" Her eyes widened slightly, and I could see her struggling to maintain her composure. "What? Of course not, Victor. Why would you even say that?" "Because," I continued, my voice dangerously low, "I know. I've known for a long time." There it was, the crack in her facade. Her smile faltered just for a second, but it was enough. She opened her mouth to say something, probably a denial or a quick excuse, but I didn't give her the chance. "I know about you and Max," I said, my voice cold. "I know everything." The color drained from her face, and she set her glass down with a trembling hand. For the first time in months, she looked genuinely afraid. "Victor, I can't explain." I shook my head, cutting her off. "Don't. There's nothing you can say that I haven't already figured out." Her eyes welled up with tears, and she reached for my arm, but I pulled away. "Please," she whispered. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I never wanted to hurt you, didn't you?" I snapped, the anger bubbling to the surface. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like that's exactly what you did." She stood there, frozen, unsure of what to say, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the texts, the lies, the betrayal, and the pity faded. "This isn't over, Lily," I said quietly, my voice filled with cold resolve. "Not by a long shot." I turned and left the kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest as I headed for the door. This was it, the beginning of the end. The next morning, the air in the house was thick with tension. Lily had barely said a word to me after our confrontation in the kitchen the night before. She tried to act normal, moving about her day as if nothing had changed, but I could feel the unease radiating from her with every glance she shot in my direction. I, on the other hand, was ready. The storm that had been building for months was finally on the verge of breaking. Today was the day everything would start falling into place. Clara, And I had planned it all carefully. We weren't just going after Max and Lily emotionally. We were going to hit them where it hurt. In their reputations, in their finances, in their lives. By the end of it, they wouldn't just lose us. They'd lose everything they'd built on lies. It was just after lunch, when I got the message from Clara, "It's time." My heart raced as I grabbed my phone and headed out the door. I didn't tell Lily where I was going. I didn't need to. She could sense that something was coming. And soon enough, she'd know exactly what. I drove through town, my fingers gripping the steering wheel as I mentally prepared for what was about to happen. Max's office building loomed in the distance, a sleek glass structure that stood out against the small-town backdrop. Inside that building, Max believed he was untouchable, running his tech company with the arrogance of a man who thought he'd never be caught. But today, that would change. I parked a block away and made my way to the small cafe where Clara was waiting. She sat in a corner booth, her face tense but determined. I slid into the seat across from her, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. We both knew what was at stake. "You ready?" she asked quietly, her voice steady. I nodded. More than ever. Clara reached into her bag and pulled out a small folder, pushing it toward me. "These are the final copies. The documents we'll present at the board meeting this afternoon." I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the damning evidence. Financial discrepancies, misappropriation of funds, all tied directly to Max. Clara had done an incredible job gathering everything. This wasn't just an affair we were exposing. This was a scandal that would ruin Max's career. But that wasn't the only thing we had up our sleeves. "We'll confront him after the meeting," Clara continued. "And once the board sees this, Max won't have any room to maneuver. They'll force him out." I nodded, the weight of what we were about to do settling heavily on my shoulders. "And Lily?" Clara hesitated, then sighed. "She'll be there, I'm sure. She's always at those meetings. You'll have your moment with her after." "But Victor..." She paused, her expression softening slightly. "Are you sure you want to go through with this? It's not just about revenge anymore. This is going to change everything, for both of us." I looked into her eyes, seeing the same pain and determination that had driven me for months. Clara wasn't just doing this for herself. She was doing it for me too, and for every moment of betrayal we had endured in silence. "I'm sure," I said firmly. "They deserve this. We deserve justice." Clara nodded, her lips pressing into a tight line. "Then let's go. The meeting starts in an hour." The boardroom was larger than I had imagined, filled with long tables, sleek chairs, and large windows that overlooked the city. Max stood at the head of the room, his back to us as he went over his presentation, completely unaware of what was about to hit him. Clara and I slipped in quietly, unnoticed by most of the attendees. I saw Lily sitting near the front, her eyes focused on Max as he spoke confidently about the company's latest earnings. I couldn't help but feel a surge of anger as I watched her, still pretending, still playing her role perfectly. The moment Max finished his speech and asked if there were any questions, Clara stood up, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. "I have something to say." Max froze, turning slowly to face her. His confident smile faltered, confusion crossing his face as Clara walked toward him, holding the folder of evidence in her hand. "What's this about, Clara?" he asked, trying to sound calm, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Clara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she handed the folder to one of the board members, who began flipping through the pages. The silence in the room grew heavy as the members read the contents, their expressions darkening with each page. "This is a record of your financial misconduct," Clara said, her voice steady but filled with quiet rage. "You've been siphoning money from the company for years, using it to fund your personal expenses. And now, the board knows." Max's face drained of color. He stepped forward, reaching for the documents, but the board member held them away from him. "This can't be true," Max stammered, his voice shaking. "Clara, what are you doing?" She met his gaze, her eyes cold. I'm taking back my life. At that moment, I stood up, drawing all eyes to me. And I'm taking back mine. Lily's eyes widened as she saw me, and I could see the panic rising in her expression. She glanced at Max, then back at me, her face pale. Victor, what are you doing here? I didn't answer her directly. Instead, I addressed the room, my voice calm but filled with the weight of months of pain and anger. Max and Lily have been lying to all of us. They've been having an affair for months, betraying not just their spouses, but their friends, their colleagues. Today, that ends. The room erupted into whispers and gasps as the board members looked between Max, Lily, and me. Max's face twisted in rage, and he lunged toward me, his fists clenched. But before he could reach me, 2 security guards stepped in and restrained him. You're finished, Max, I said quietly. It's over. The room was in chaos. The board members exchanged shocked glances, some whispering to each other in disbelief, while others stared at Max and Lily, waiting for an explanation that would never come. The tension was suffocating, the weight of betrayal finally crashing down on everyone present. Max struggled against the security guards, his face twisted with fury and desperation. You can't do this, he shouted, his voice filled with disbelief. This is a setup. Clara, Victor. You can't ruin me like this. Clara stood still, her expression unyielding, arms crossed. Ruin you, she said, her voice calm but icy. Max, you did this to yourself. You thought no one would ever find out, didn't you? You thought you could manipulate and cheat without consequences. Max's eyes darted from Clara to me, then back to the board members. It's all lies. They're just trying to take me down for personal reasons. One of the board members, an older man with graying hair, spoke up, his voice firm. Max, we've reviewed the documents. This isn't just a personal vendetta. These are serious allegations of financial misconduct, and now this affair complicates things further. This kind of behavior is unacceptable in a company of this size. The weight of his words hit Max like a blow. He stopped struggling, his shoulders slumping as he realized there was no escape. His eyes burned with anger as he looked at me, but the fight had gone out of him. Lily, on the other hand, sat frozen in her seat, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. She hadn't spoken a word since I had exposed their affair. The room's attention shifted toward her, waiting for her response, but all she could do was stare at me, her face pale. Victor, she finally whispered, her voice trembling. Please don't do this. I didn't mean for it to happen. It was a mistake. I looked at her, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and anger. There was a time when her tears would have moved me, when I would have done anything to make things right between us. But not anymore. A mistake? I said, my voice sharp. Lily, this wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. It wasn't a moment of weakness. You made choice after choice, lying to me, sneaking around with Max. You thought you could have both lives, and now you're paying the price. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she opened her mouth to say something, but the words caught in her throat. She looked around the room, her gaze shifting from Max to Clara, and finally back to me, but no one offered her any support. She was alone in this, just like Max. One of the other board members stood up, clearing his throat. Given the severity of these accusations, I think it's best if we adjourn this meeting and handle this matter privately. Max, you'll need to meet with our legal team. As for your position with the company, it's clear you can't stay on. Max's face contorted in disbelief, his body slumping back into the chair as the reality of his downfall settled in. The power he had wielded for so long was slipping through his fingers, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The board members began gathering their things, muttering amongst themselves. Some shot sympathetic glances toward Clara. Others looked at me with cautious respect. The meeting was over, and so was Max's reign. As the board members filed out of the room, Clara stepped forward, her hand resting briefly on my arm. We did it, she whispered, her voice soft but filled with resolve. I nodded, the weight of everything we had just accomplished sinking in. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming our lives, our dignity, from people who had taken so much from us. Max and Lily remained in their seats, both of them looking utterly defeated. The security guard stood by, waiting to escort Max out. But before they could, I took one last step toward him. "Max," I said, my voice calm but cold. "I trusted you. I thought we were friends. You betrayed me in the worst way possible, and now you've lost everything because of it." He didn't respond. He didn't even look up. He just sat there, staring blankly at the table, as if the weight of his actions had finally crushed him. I turned to Lily, who still hadn't moved, her face streaked with silent tears. There was so much I could have said to her about how much I had loved her, about the life we had built together, about the future I thought we had. But none of it mattered anymore. "It's over," I said simply. "Pack your things and leave." Her breath caught in her throat, but she nodded slowly, as if she had known all along that this moment was inevitable. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the boardroom, Clara by my side. As we stepped into the hallway, the weight that had been crushing me for months finally began to lift. The air felt clearer, lighter, as if the dark cloud that had hung over my life had finally dissipated. I glanced at Clara, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled. It wasn't a smile of triumph or joy. It was a smile of release. We had done what we needed to do, and now we could begin to move on. As we walked toward the exit, Clara spoke, her voice thoughtful. "What now?" I paused for a moment, considering the question. What now? For so long, my life had been consumed by anger and betrayal. But now, standing on the other side of it, the possibilities felt endless. "Now," I said, "we live